Welcome to the Perinatal Wellbeing Podcast. I'm Christine, your host and certified perinatal mental health professional. This podcast is all about authentic conversations. We want to open up the discussions around perinatal health and well-being, from mood and anxiety disorders to breastfeeding to grief and loss in the perinatal period, and everything in between. While this is not therapy or medical advice, it is the place where we are going to continue to open up the discussion around all things perinatal mental, physical, emotional, and sexual health to help reduce stigma and break down these barriers to support. Hi, Drew. Welcome to the Perinatal Wellbeing Podcast.
Thank you, Christine. It's a real honor to be here.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm so excited to have you on because we have not had a dad or a partner's experience on the podcast yet. And I'm so excited to kind of open up the discussion around that type of experience and hopefully have listeners, hear from you and kind of what that was like. And hopefully for them to be able to just talk more about it, about their own experience, because we know there's a lot of focus on the birthing person or, the person who's experiencing potential difficulties after a baby. But I don't think there's enough, talk about the person, the partner, if there's a partner there and their experience. You tell me, what do you think about that before we launch into your story? Do you agree with that, or what do you see out there?
Well, I think I'll start with I'll try not to feel too much pressure being the first one.
Yeah,
the other thing I'll say is, my experience is my experience. And so have to be mindful of there could be any myriad of other experiences that are different or have their own unique set of challenges or whatever a person may have experienced. So if nothing else, I just hope that it's an opportunity to, start more of these conversations and have people recognize it's important to talk through these things and to work through these things and to get support so that they can be the best that they can be through what can be a very challenging circumstance. So I think to your point, we, in the work that I do, we often know that majority of resources, majority of support are very focused on moms and come from a maternal paradigm. And that's not wrong. That's important because moms need that support. It's how do we add to this conversation around becoming a parent, and how do we add to who's involved in the becoming a parent process, and what does that mean for the child? Because at the end of the day, those who are ones who are going to probably reap the greatest rewards from the support of both parents is the child. So that's, I think, how we try to shift things and talk about it from that lens.
Yes, absolutely. And the reason how I found you was through the Dad Central podcast, which is a great resource for dads, including not just the podcast, but including the website. And I hope to kind of talk a bit more about that later. But it's a fantastic resource. The podcast is great conversations with dads, some pretty famous dads. I was excited to listen to Trevor Linden. As I'm a hockey fan, but it was, I think it's just so important to normalize, like you said, all different experiences, right? We all have different experiences, even if we have maybe similar symptoms or diagnoses, if we experience mental health issues, but it's all going to feel quite different for each of us. So getting those different perspectives, I think, is so helpful. Just opening up those discussions.
Yeah. And that's something that doesn't happen a lot.
Right.
In some of the work that we do. And so we partnered with Dr. Jessica Ball and her graduate student, Jessica Pratzina at Dad Central, and with the Public Health Agency of Canada to do a review of a whole bunch of literature from 2015 to 2019. They looked at over 245 studies.
Wow.
And just to summarize, one of the key findings in it was postpartum depression in men, and found that it's underscreened, it's underreported, but it occurs at a rate that's pretty significant compared to the general population of men. And so, but nobody's talking about it. And there was a unique opportunity, and I'm not going to name any type of names. There's a unique opportunity to actually bring some awareness to this issue through a media outlet.
Mm.
And they basically said, it's not good news. We don't want to talk about this at the time.
Wow.
And just maybe as the way it was framed or positioned, but we felt it was a very important. We need to be talking about it. And so, it's great to have things like Bell Let's Talk, where they're focusing on mental health, like holistically, or
Mm-hmm.
where you can have these avenues. And so I think it is important, as you said, to bring it up, to talk about it, put it in the open, and then work through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And can I just ask, just out of curiosity, how many years ago was that? Was that like super recent, or was it a bunch of years ago where that media outlet didn't want to talk about it?
Within the last 3 years.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, and so my other thinking is, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, that like I'm a therapist in private practice in the perinatal field, and then doing the podcast and having these conversations with people that are also like in this world, whether they're advocating or they've had these experiences already. But, I'm hoping that listeners are not in this field. I know there's a lot for my
Mm-hmm.
podcast, but I want, I just don't know how much people outside of this field or who are working in this area or have already had this experience are actually talking about it. And like, how do we get just anyone to talk about these topics? I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, it has to start someplace,
Someplace.
really, and then people have to have I guess, a good experience, or they have to feel safe. They have to feel validated. They have to feel like they matter in some respect. And I think the more that can start just like from a one-to-one, so as your work as a
Mhm.
therapist, and then they essentially become, for lack of a better word, your greatest advocates, because say, you know what, I was going with a really difficult time, but this really helped me. And then it opens other people's eyes. And so I think the more that you have those types of experiences, people start to feel safe, they start to feel acknowledged, they start to feel validated, and they start to see changes in their life as a result. Whether they choose to be vocal or they choose not to be, if nothing else, the changes in their life then begin to allow people to take notice. So the more that happens, individually, and then collectively, and it branches out, eventually things
Mhm.
will start to change. So
Yeah.
I think you just keep doing what you're doing,
Yeah.
and you find champions, or you find advocates, and you find opportunities, because you're consistently moving in that direction.
Mhm.
And eventually those opportunities hopefully lead to more opportunities and open more doors. And so I think, if nothing else, as I age, my kids will probably call me very, very old, even though I try not to be.
Yeah.
I've learned that it just really requires a lot of persistence and a lot of keeping at it. And the more that you as an individual can almost model that, then
Mhm.
I think others will take notice.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Drew, because what I find too is since my experience with postpartum anxiety and depression, I am just very truthful and honest. And that's what I also try to aim for on the podcast is like authentic conversations, right? To be able to share with people, like it's not all, it's having a kid is not a fairy tale, but also that it's even if we have experiences of perinatal mental health issues, it doesn't have to be all doom and gloom either. Like we don't have to be alone. There is treatment. There are, recovery is completely within reach. It's something, it's a mental health issue that actually responds so well to treatment. And I like to use that and say, like, it was a tough time. It was a really dark time. And I came through it. I got to the other side. And, I'm able to kind of use that in my work and, where I'm at now. But I think having those discussions, those authentic discussions, one-on-one, with people, with friends, with family members, like, hey, yeah, I had a tough time. And this is what was helpful for me, like you said, and this is how I came through the other side. Do you find, like, did you share with friends and family members kind of after the fact? of what you experienced and what that was like for you? Did you share with them kind of more so the realities?
No, actually, I
Okay.
didn't. And
Okay.
so one of the challenges is that I think depending on the person and depending on their experiences, you tend to be like, I can figure this out. I'm a very independent person, and also one that goal oriented, ambitious, driven. And I was like, I got this. Like I can sort this out, right? I'll
Hmm.
just buckle down. I'll just work harder. And that didn't work.
Hmm.
It actually made it more challenging. And also, when I did share with maybe the not the best or right people,
Hmm.
unfortunately, it wasn't very well received. And I don't think that I got good feedback or good advice. And so
Right.
it's kind of like you venture out there,
Hmm.
and it kind of like you get like a little slap, and you're like, okay, well, I'm not doing that again.
Yep.
And so you just kind of say, okay, well, I got to take care of this myself. I got to sort out myself.
Hmm.
Also feeling a lot of pressure to perform and to juggle all the different things. You
Hmm.
can feel like, where am I going to find time? How am I going to find time? I just don't have time for this. I gotta deal with it. And
Yeah.
so unfortunately, that's a recipe for eventual burnout or disaster,
Hmm.
because something's got to give at a certain point in time if things don't change and the pressure continues to be build. And so yeah, that was my experience. I didn't.
Hmm.
And that's why I think it's so important to talk about now, because hindsight is always 2020,
Yes.
and things could have been different in terms of my well-being
Hmm.
had I been more aware of
Hmm.
what actually was going on, and actually educated in this area and understanding about this area. So
Yes.
hence that awareness piece, even about the public knowing,
Yep.
and then had a knowledge of what type of resources and supports I could connect to help me through this. And
Right.
sometimes it might only take 2 or 3 short conversations, and that might be all a person needs to be able
Mhm.
to then move forward on their own. Because the goal here is not, to put somebody in lifelong therapy. We'll say it's to give
Mhm.
you the help you need at the moment you need it, so you can move back into where you're probably normally supposed or would more regularly be.
Absolutely. And that's a great point because I find that as a therapist, when clients reach out to me kind of really early on in their process, like they're just realizing something's not right, something doesn't feel right. I feel off. I don't feel like myself, or I'm kind of don't feel like I'm recovering mentally or emotionally in the postpartum period like I thought I would. I find that generally our sessions are much shorter, and they just we get them back kind of on track and get them to themselves and feeling well again and getting those coping skills engaged to be able to manage what's going on, and then they tend to kind of go on their way, which is great. You're right. Like I don't want anyone to be in therapy for lifelong, unless that's what they want. But then generally if someone comes to me quite like a lot months and months later after things have developed and really progressed, then they tend to be working with me, longer. That's of course a generalization, but um that is what I notice definitely as a pattern for sure. So that early intervention piece I think is key. And even just the knowing, like you said, for you realizing and we'll get into your story, but like kind of realizing like, oh, this is what's going on. Was that helpful for you
After the fact, it
after
was
the
definitely
fact?
helpful.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think the way I would describe it, before, I guess we're not getting into my story, but is I was not, how would I describe it? I just felt there was so much going
Yeah.
on that I was just, deer in the headlights, we'll say, just
Hmm.
survival mode,
Yeah.
I'd say. And so in that survival mode, you kind of get this like tunnel vision.
Hmm.
You're not able to really stop and pause and kind of take stock. And I
Yeah.
think that's required. And I think many of us, the pandemic might have caused that to happen for some people. Okay, they've had the great pause or whatever you want to call it. And so they've
Yeah.
had this time to pause and reflect. And so for that reason, it could have been helpful. But
Hmm.
at the way life was for us at the time, it was go, go, go.
Mhm.
significant event, like nonstop. And it
Yeah.
was like, just get through it.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what happened for me.
Right. Okay. So, do you want to share with us kind of what the experience was like after having kids?
Mhm.
So, first of all, how many kids do you have?
I am blessed to have three beautiful children.
Lovely, lovely. Me too. I have three too. And so, what was it like to become a dad for you the first time around? What was that like?
Amazing. It was
Yeah.
so good. We had twins. So
Wow.
that was a very interesting experience all the way through. There's high anxiety, just in general. There's two of them. There's things like twin to twin transfusion. There's, what problems, what complications could happen. So, that was, significant as far as what we were actually dealing with. But the
Mhm.
process itself, we felt very well supported just from the medical perspective,
Okay, good.
and, good family, good friends. And so I was overjoyed to be a dad. And it was something that's, significant for me because of my own childhood experience, traumatic experience. And so I was very focused on ensuring that I showed up as a dad and I was a great positive influence for my children as they grew. So it was very exciting. Of course, to have twins, I mean, it's a real amazing blessing. And so
Yeah.
that was, having, it was also very difficult to conceive. So this was like a 2+ year process. A whole other story about that. But
Okay.
anyways, we got there. It was all natural, wonderful blessing. So it was exciting. And
Yeah.
then they came,
Mm.
and then it was so hard,
Right.
because, and we knew there was going to be challenging with two.
Mhm.
And I took parental leave for about three months to be there, like up until like they were about 4 months old. And so, but with twins, and one of our twins was colicky, and
Mhm.
you're not sleeping much, you're not doing it, you're just survivor mode. I mean, there were many nights I had one, my partner had another, and we were like two ships passing in the night as we just kind of wandered the house trying to get them to settle down and calm. It's like 1 a.m, 2 a.m, 3, and it's just this constant thing. So
Yeah.
all that to say, it was still an amazing, wonderful experience, and I would never trade any of that
Mhm.
for the world, because it's something that you just jump into and you do. But it was physically grueling.
Yeah.
Emotionally, there were so many wonderful, like, newness and highs, and some challenges, but those challenges seem to kind of just go away with the joy of having these two relatively healthy children. So
Right.
that
Right.
that experience was a really wonderful one for us.
Right. And can I ask, were there any, I mean, with twins, there might have been, but were there any kind of really unexpected, or things that really shocked you about becoming a parent that you just really did not expect?
I think for me, the biggest is feeling completely helpless at
Mm.
times, especially when you have a child that just will not stop crying. And you're like, I've done literally everything I can do. All I can think of, both of us have tried it. And we're like, oh my God, what do we do? And you're like, I've never been put to this type of stress, we'll say.
Yes.
Right. And then there's the unknown of, like, is everything okay? Is the child okay or not? Beyond just like, if there's like a fever or something, you're like,
Yeah.
so those are, I think, the you can never anticipate
Mhm.
those, and how you are pushed beyond what you ever thought you'd ever have to be pushed, just in some of your own mental and emotional things that you're going through.
Right. Absolutely. Especially because they can't talk. They
Hmm.
can't tell you like, oh, my tummy hurts or my head hurts or, it's like, what's wrong? What's the matter? Yes, I remember how frustrating that was. What was that like for you as a dad, that feeling of helplessness that you said, like, I kind of never really experienced that before becoming a dad? How did you cope with that? What was that kind of like for you?
Yeah. Well, not I didn't cope with it all that well. I
Okay.
think what happens is, there were situations where I was like, I'm overwhelmed. I can't do it. And I maybe reacted in a way that I shouldn't have reacted.
Hmm.
And then, on to make matters worse, I would beat myself up over it. I was like, oh my God, like, how could I do that? How can I react that way? Like, like, what do you like, so it became a real negative cycle. And I think that's the challenging part. And I think there are a lot of dads in general, or maybe in people in general, who are really hard on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, that was the beginning of a lot of, say, soul searching, a
Mm,
lot of spinning. And I am generally a more of an introspective person anyways. I think it's
right.
part of my upbringing. My
Mm,
mom literally forced me to be, because she would never leave me alone and always ask me questions and force me
mm,
to think. And so it just kind of ingrained in me, which is an amazing blessing now. But at the time, that's what it created. And so I spent a lot of time, reflecting,
mm-hmm.
analyzing, evaluating, but a lot of time in that negative cycle as well, beating myself up. So
Yeah,
it was definitely challenging from that perspective.
right. And in that time, you said you had supportive family.
Mhm.
Did you have someone? I know you mentioned kind of going through difficult times and trying kind of testing the waters. But in terms of just that, like becoming a dad, that transition, that feeling helpless, never really, experienced that in the same way before. Did you have other friends or family members who were dads that you could talk to or you did talk to about that transition to becoming a dad?
Not too much. If
Yeah.
anyone, it was probably my mom. I might have spoken to, but again, not even that much.
Right.
What I ended up doing was finding more resources online. I just
Okay, cool.
searched and I found fatherhood organizations. I found a few resources. One was, Five Things Every Kid Needs from Dad, was a book by the National Center for Fathering in the U.S.
Okay.
Another one was, about how to like bond with your child, again from that organization in the U.S. But again, most of those were past that infant stage, right?
Right.
Again, I mentioned survival mode with twins and my career at the time and my partner's business and the challenges with going with her business. It was pretty much just get through it.
Right. Yeah.
And then, so it was more when my twins were about two, I'd say. I really started to do more of that. And of course, toddler stage and
Hmm.
trying to figure out toddler stage kind of forces you to pursue some additional risk. Like, okay, how do we deal with this? So
Yeah.
those were though, it's you, they say that, other people don't actually take action until like it's too much, it's too painful for them.
Hmm.
And so you're like, the pain of this difficult experience is like forcing me to then move and do something. It wasn't being proactive.
Yeah, yeah. The pain, the discomfort is outweighing the not seeking support or
Yeah.
not, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so what was that like for you returning to work? Because I talk about this a lot with my mostly clients who identify as female and return to work after their maternity leave. So like a
Mhm.
year, now 18 months sometimes. What was that like for you returning to work after paternity leave?
I remember this was before, like after paternity leave, but this was like home for 2 weeks. And then I went back to work. That very first day,
Yeah.
I was like, what am I doing here? Like
Right.
all I could think about was like the twins at home.
Yeah.
And once the workday was done, I remember literally picking my bag up and sprinting to the
Oh,
car because I
yeah.
was just like, I'm going home. So I sprinted to the car and I was like, I was just so thrilled to get home, get back home. It was
Yeah.
amazing. But after returning to work from paternity leave, um, I don't really remember, if I'm being honest. I
Okay.
think that would have been 2013. Um, yeah, it was, I think there were a lot of factors happening. I wasn't necessarily thrilled with
Mm-hmm.
the work environment. There were some unhealthy, toxic things were going on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think if anything, I felt torn. Right, I wanted to support at home, but I obviously knew I needed to work, and I wanted to work as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I don't know. It's kind of not a helpful response, but the honest thing is, I don't really remember too much about it.
Right. Yeah. And that's interesting too, because a lot of times we'll have gaps in memory if we've experienced, I don't know if you experience anxiety, but just in general, if we've experienced any anxiety or difficulty in a transition or things like that, like gaps in memory are really common, right? And also, like you said, okay, so survival mode, like talking about survival mode, you have twins at home, you're going back to work, juggling career, coming home to two babies who are still little, right? Like 4 months old is little. A relationship, like that's a lot on your plate.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think overall that experience was pretty positive.
Good.
Yeah, there's challenges, there's learning, but there was so much joy
Good.
around the children and
Mhm.
seeing them and having them grow, and that was a really exciting thing. And work at the time was, a good distraction. I actually enjoyed, at a certain point in time, going back into the office and
Mhm.
being able to commit myself to something, but then also coming home and having, the beauty of this new family growing. So
Right.
I don't think it was that challenging. Now
Okay.
it's different when you talk about after my son came.
Right.
That was a whole other experience.
Right. Okay. And so anything else kind of like you said, hindsight's 2020, but kind of after having twins that came up for you in terms of your mental health or your experience as being a dad to twins, anything else that you want to share with listeners?
I just viewed it as a wonderful thing and
Awesome.
a unique experience, and really enjoyed having that privilege of twin A, twin B, and
Yeah.
talking about it, and seeing ultrasounds with like both of them. It's a
Yeah.
unique experience, for
Absolutely.
sure. And so it was. There's the one thing I will say is, as a you think about provision, I think, just naturally as a father, and then you think about, what does that mean? What's that going to look like? And so, there's definitely stresses around providing financially,
Hmm.
um, and thinking about what that means, and then you're two of everything, and so
Yeah.
all those elements, actually, those were probably that added to some stress. And probably when I think about going back to work, those probably contributed to be like, all right, well, I got to work, I'm going back to work, and
Yeah.
let's make this stuff happen. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's probably the only thing I can say, I guess, at the end of it,
Absolutely.
the twin experience.
Yeah. Okay. And so then how old were the twins when you had your third?
They were almost 3 years old, so two
Okay.
years and about 9 months, I guess, when our
Okay.
son was born.
Okay. And so what do you want to share about what that experience was like for you welcoming um well actually sorry, the therapist in me is curious about in terms of like the pregnancy having one baby
Mhm.
versus two. Was that different? Like did that feel different for you? What was that like?
Yeah, it felt strange. Like,
Right.
there's the other one in there.
Right, right.
Overall, that experience seemed relatively easy compared
Mm-hmm.
to the other experience when we just think about one baby versus two. Uh,
Right.
in the context of what we were going through life wise, it
Mhm.
was extremely stressful. Don't necessarily need to add those factors in, other than just know it was a very high stress period of time. And my main concern was my partner's mental and emotional well being because of the stress that she was undergoing, I guess, as a result of sort of life circumstances at the time.
Right. Okay. And so, um, was that during pregnancy as well that you noticed there was some mental health, maybe, just stuff going on or high stress during the pregnancy as well?
Yeah,
Like not
not meant.
necessarily due to the pregnancy, but due to the life
No.
circumstance.
So, I mean, I guess it's vague if I don't say it. Essentially, she had decided to sell her business,
Okay.
had a business partner. The relationship had deteriorated and
Mhm.
become, not functional. And so it was a choice that she had made to move on. And
Right.
that came, think of that as a high conflict separation. It was just, two opposite ends of the spectrum,
Right.
and dividing, financial assets in a way that, one party is probably going to feel like they're going to get screwed in the deal.
Right.
And so that's highly stressful. And we also had, I think, a move in there as well. So we
Oh, wow.
moved from one home to another, but we chose to keep the other home. Didn't have a necessarily. So there was a lot going on there,
Mhm.
moving. So there's a lot of things happening, but the primary stressor was the sale of a business.
Right. And so we know like so for the birthing person, if there are like those big life transitions or high stress, high stress or high anxiety during pregnancy, that's can be a precursor to postpartum mental health issues. And I mean, even just moving on its own, right? If it's like one of the most stressful things, right? So, absolutely. And so, what was it like for you, kind of being the support person during the pregnancy, throughout all of these things? How did that impact you and baby coming, and what was that like for you?
For me, it was do what you need to do.
Mm,
I loved my partner. I loved my family. I loved my kids. And, I always wanted to be the best dad and husband I could be. And
mm,
so it was do whatever you can do to support. And thankfully, I was in a new position, a new place, and they were very supportive. So there were some times I needed to be like, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to, you know, take this day here because I needed to help support my partner around the business and some of the actual nuts and bolts of the business operation, those types of things. And so it was challenging though, but for
mm,
me, it was just what you did. And um, I took pride in being able to be that for my family,
mhm.
and it mattered to me that I was able to do that. And I didn't feel any. I just felt that's what you do.
Right,
So, but it was certainly challenging, and
right,
I did all that I could to support in the best way that I could, and make sure that we were all doing as well as we can do.
right, right. And as the support person, did you have a support person like amongst friends, or did you have someone that you could just like turn to, like, hey, I'm so stressed, this is what's going on, or
I don't think I had the personal awareness to know that I even needed that much at the time. I
Hmm.
was very focused on just do what you can do. And for better or for worse, like I'm accustomed to taking on a lot. And uh, that is what I did. I just took
Yeah.
it on. I
Right,
just and did it.
right, right. Yeah, just kind of got on with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like you said, not even really having the time or taking the time to take stock and like, what's going on with me? Like, how am I feeling? How am I doing? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so then what was kind of welcoming your third one into your family? What was that experience like for you?
The initial experience was wonderful.
Yeah.
It was a boy. Um, I had, secretly in my heart, always wanted to make sure that I could be a father to a son,
Mm,
the way that I didn't have the father that I always wanted. And
mm,
so it was to me a huge, huge blessing to have
mm,
that opportunity. My partner seemed quite overjoyed to know that I would also have a son. So she felt very positive about that.
right.
And you know, but there were twin toddlers at home,
Mm,
and knowing how to, support twin toddlers and their needs, and the world revolves around them, just one of them, but having two of them at the same time,
yeah.
and then having a brand new baby, being in a new home, having my partner and now basically be a full-time stay-at-home parent because the business had sold like or closed a month and a half before our son was born. And so that was a significant life transition for her, a lot of uncertainty and doubt in terms of, the immediate was full-time stay-at-home parent.
Mm,
But with no certainty as to what, there's a little bit of a plan, but no certainty. And so there were a lot of different factors that started to add up as time went on
mm.
once we were into that stage of parenthood.
Right. And how was it different, welcoming the third baby home and already having kids at home, like that juggling between like twin toddlers needs and newborn baby needs? How
Mhm.
was that different for you?
Well, first up is one seems so simple compared to two at a time. We're like, what do people complain about when they have one kid? Like, this is so easy, right? Come
Right,
on. And Jordan was a relatively calm baby.
right.
He seemed, to be, we could manage him pretty well. Then it was, learn to divide and conquer, right? So I was a lot of time with the twins, engaging them, playing with them, just and doing that. And but then I think the real learning where we needed a lot of support was in integrating the two, right? So we could handle the one, and then we could handle the two, but then how do you bring them all together? And
Right.
that's where things were not as, I'd say, successful. And there's a lot of angst and challenges, and that
Mm.
created tensions and issues. And so that was just the biggest, I think, hard part for us.
Right, right. Which is so hard, like kind of that introducing, each kid to the older kid, every time mine were all three separate. But definitely that concern, like, will the older one be nice to the little one? And what's that like? And yeah, it's so challenging. And I we don't get that manual, in the mail or, when you leave the hospital, right? But of course there's resources and stuff, but also trying to put those things into practice with your family and your dynamics, is not easy. That's for sure.
No, it's not. And then layer on differences in parenting perspectives, layer on differences of life stresses, layer on differences of, just, you know, um, backgrounds. And so that creates certainly challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then what kind of progressed after welcoming the third baby, um, in terms of your partner's mental health? What do you want to share about that? What was that like?
Well, I think the only thing I share is that upon reflection, I believe we needed more support, and it would have been helpful to get a lot more support at that time
Hmm.
for all of our benefits. And so I think that's the simplest way I can put it, is that
Hmm.
life became very challenging, and again, both internal, like personal um, recognition of areas that we could grow, but
Hmm.
also the external pressures of life. Our daughter was diagnosed with some significant autoimmune. Weren't sure it was autoimmune first, but that happened, which added an additional stress.
Right.
And then the whole business situation I mentioned. Then when we had significant sudden deaths in the family. So, I mean, within that first year after our son was born, life became extremely stressful. And we did seek out support. We sought some counseling support. And, the more that counseling progressed, the deeper things became, as far as the need for support and the need for some help in these areas. And so, but again, it's that point where the pain becomes too much, or the discomfort becomes too much. Okay, now I got to take action. So, yeah, I think it was an area that I was feeling a tremendous amount of weight that even I couldn't carry. And I was, again, something that I took pride in.
Mhm.
And I actually verbalized, I said, uh, I can't handle all of this stuff, I'd say. And we need to get some support here,
Mhm.
beyond just like I'd helped out with getting a mother's helper, uh,
Yeah.
3 months into, my son's birth, after he was born.
Mhm.
And that mother's helper was an amazing blessing, great benefit to our family. But, that was more of the day to day, like things around the house and some of those other things. But
Right.
the more important work was really on, the mental and emotional aspects for both of us as parents.
Right. What was that like for you? Like you've said, you took pride in supporting your family, your partner, being there, like being a, great dad and being present. But what was that like for you, kind of getting to that point of, oh, I can't handle this. I'm at this point. What,
Yeah.
like,
The word that comes to mind as you're asking that question was, it was excruciating.
mm,
It was really painful
yeah.
to see what was happening
Hmm.
in our um, in our home, in our relationship, in our family,
Hmm.
because it was the exact opposite of what I'd envisioned and hoped for, and what I thought we had as a shared vision. So, and to see the pain that it was that others were experiencing, my partner, my children,
Hmm.
um, it was excruciating.
Yeah.
It's something you never want anyone to have to experience. And So and it's going back to that feeling of I almost felt a little bit helpless, which is not a good feeling when you're accustomed to like being the one who solves the problems and gets things done and makes
Mhm.
things happen, and you have goals and you work towards it. And so there's a whole lot that created it. The experience to be what it was like for me was very excruciatingly painful.
Right. And so was that counseling helpful for you?
Hmm. For me personally,
Mhm.
um, it was helpful in some respects, but I
Mhm.
felt it was detrimental in others.
Okay.
And let me explain. And so it was helpful in that many of the things that I felt were issues or things that I were experiencing, they were able to be validated
Mhm.
through counseling.
Yeah.
But also, um, it was clear that even though I was validated and there were some things that I had been wanting and requesting and trying to move forward, they I also felt invalidated because I wasn't in the relationship with my partner. It's like the counselor would say it, and it's like it was like the best thing in the world. And I'm like, I said that to you like 5 years ago. Like, so
Right.
and I, to my own recognition, I didn't handle that very well. I didn't handle it very maturely because I became very discouraged and frustrated. I'm like, you'll listen to some stranger, but you
Mhm.
won't listen to your partner. And
Mhm.
so it was just it was helpful again in some respects, but also challenging in others. And again, it's also about the quality of the counselor or the therapist. It's also about what's the shared goals that
Mhm.
you have when you're going into that process together. Do you have shared goals? Is that clear from the outset? When I think some of those things were not clear for us, and also not necessarily clear, but because some of them were almost like discovered as we were going through. Like you came in for one thing,
Mhm.
but as we began discussing, it was like this whole other Pandora's box was opened up. And so that I think is in our circumstance. So that experience was certainly um, challenging.
Right. Absolutely. That is the hard part about therapy, which happens, right? Is like a lot of people will come in for one thing, or for example, postpartum or perinatal anxiety or depression, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, and I have this thing that's been going on forever, or relationship challenges, or the possibilities are endless. So it is tough, right? It's hard. And therapy is really vulnerable.
Hmm.
Right. It's so vulnerable to put yourself out there. And like you said, you're sharing all this stuff with a stranger, right? And that stranger is not vulnerable with you either,
Mhm.
right? Which is a good thing. That's a professional thing. But it's hard when you don't get anything back because you're like, okay, I'm just doing all the vulnerability here, and that's scary.
Yeah, it can be.
Yeah.
It's interesting though, your point. Um, the way that I see it is if you begin building on a cracked foundation,
Yeah.
ultimately, when the weight of life starts to come to add on, that foundation is going to give way.
Mhm.
And so, or you'll start to notice it, like eventually the walls, you'll start to see separations in the corners of the walls. You'll start to notice maybe a leak here or there. Well, I mean, that's because the foundation isn't right in the first place. And so I think that's to me the analogy that represents this idea. I come in for one thing,
Mm.
but really the problem is there. And so that's where you have to then recognize what is the foundation you're building on,
Yeah.
both personally, what's your personal foundation, and then what is the relational foundation, I find. And I think many of these symptoms are indicators of the foundation needs work. And
Right.
so that to me is, and that's always been my approach, is like, let's find the root. Let's find the where this goes, and let's get there and fix the foundation, and then we can rebuild and repair the things above on the right foundation.
Right.
But not everyone approaches things that way, and that can create issues when you're like, I just want the top wall fixed. I don't want to talk about my foundation, but I'm telling you, your wall's going to crumble if you don't fix that foundation. Well, too bad. I don't care. Just fix that corner in
Just
the wall for
yeah.
me. That's all I want.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, you're going to have some challenges there.
Yeah, just plaster it and I'll deal with it at another time. right?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's not, yeah, that wasn't me. And that was the challenge. I had a partner who wanted the wall plastered, and I was like, let's get to the root.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Like that speaks to, kind of going into the experience, being on the same page or not being on the same page, right? Being clear about those goals, like what are our goals? What are our individual goals? What are our partner goals? And I like to conceptualize, the work that can be done or, the support that's sometimes needed in relationships is like facing parenthood, for example, as the partnership, right? Like we decided together to do this, like to have a kid or so a bunch of kids together.
Mhm.
How do we stay in that partnership? Because it can be easy, right? With life stressors, with fatigue, with, all the things that you guys had to deal with. That weighs a lot and can take us apart easily. And then people can get to the point where they're like roommates or, they're not like really talking. Yeah, like that survival mode. Survival mode is helpful for a short period of time. But when we're in survival mode for like a long period of time, that, has detrimental effects on us. And, I do like to talk about that partnership and, how are we facing this together instead of course there's moments where like we bite each other's heads off or something, like I really needed you to do this thing and you did it this way and that's not how I would have done it. But ultimately coming back together, are we on the same page with parenting values? What do raising kids, like what does that mean to us? Like what are our values, our family values, our individual values? How does that all play into it? And I think that partnership level can be super important, has to be super important when we're struggling, either partner with mental health issues. Just knowing
Yeah.
that that person is there and supportive on both sides can make all the difference.
To me, one of the things that is really critical is emotional and psychological safety in that partnership, and being able to be. You talked about vulnerability. You got to be able to be vulnerable with each other and open and honest with each other, but also accepting and understanding of each other. And so that's where I think the partnership, which is so critical,
Mhm.
requires being very intentional
Mhm.
in seeing, hearing, and accepting each other.
Mhm. As we are.
Yes, yeah, as we
Yeah.
are. Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Not just like this is how I want you to be, right? This is how you are right now in this moment. This is how I am right now in this moment. I'm struggling. This is real. This is me. In hindsight, of course, hindsight's 2020, like you said, but what could have been or you think would have been helpful? Did you have individual sessions with the therapist for yourself or just couple sessions?
There were just a couple, and
Okay.
then there was a request that I go for a particular reason.
Oh, okay.
And so I went, and the person was pretty clear at the end. Your relationship is in distress. You need to resolve your relationship. That's what's the issue here. So go and work on the relationship. I'm like, okay, great. That's what I
Right.
thought.
Yeah.
But now it's even more clear, and go and work on it. Okay.
Mhm.
So that's what I attempted to do.
Okay.
So yeah.
And how was that in the context of having toddler twins and a young baby at home? What was that like trying to find the time, have the time to focus on repairing your relationship?
Well, for me, it was priority number one.
Okay.
I believed and had a clear vision of a happy, strong, loving family.
Mhm.
And that was what I wanted to create, primarily because my children,
Yeah.
what I envisioned for their future, and what I knew about um, the basically the relationship and the parents will dictate essentially the outcome for the children as they grow. And I
Mhm.
knew that the moment that we worked on our stuff and our relationship, we would see the corresponding benefits in our children.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my message over and over. And that the more that we work on this and us,
Mm-hmm.
the better our children will be.
Yeah.
So it was my main priority. So it wasn't a matter of finding the time. It was, let's do this,
Right.
because I'm committed
Mm-hmm.
to us and to our family and to what that means, because that's just what, again, was my priority. Right.
Right.
I wanted to create that, and I wanted to see that brought about for my kids. So
Right.
I just intend, like, that's, again, my approach is, what is it? What do we need to do?
Yeah.
Let's go do it then, and make it happen.
Right. And I think that's a great approach, right? And I'm curious, were there times when, in thinking about fatherhood or even in thinking about supporting your partner, um, in that postpartum period, were there times when that approach didn't work?
Well, it all depends on what you say didn't work.
Okay.
Well, I'd say, did it create challenges, or tensions or conflict? It
Mhm.
did.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think I ran into my own mental and emotional challenges, and that, goals, my intention, my heart, my actions, I tried to create alignment, that they're all doing and saying the same thing,
Hmm.
but it was being perceived in a very different way. At least it came across that it was being perceived in a very different. So I struggled a lot with that, because it was so counter to who I was and what I was about, and what I thought that I was communicating. And so I suffered with a lot of anger, a lot
Hmm.
of bitterness, a lot of
Hmm.
resentment, a lot
Hmm.
of confusion. And so those are really negative, detrimental thoughts and feelings that really impacted my ability to fully engage and show up from the place of wholeness and healing that my partner or my kids needed. And so I withdrew a lot, or I would just shut down, because I'm like, I'm not engaging here, because if I do, I'm just gonna, this anger is gonna come out. And so I just, okay, um,
Hmm.
I'm out. And so that, for me, is where um, having those supports and outlets, and feeling validated that I could express these hard feelings safely,
Hmm.
was something that I just didn't have, but would have been very important and helpful to have, as well as awareness for me personally of, like, what does a healthy relationship look like? I mentioned that I had a traumatic childhood experience. Well, I mean, I was fortunate that, when I was 10, my mom remarried, and I had a very positive male role model in my stepdad from the time I was 10.
Hmm.
But I wouldn't necessarily say that the model of their relationship is like, the textbook model healthy relationship. There are some real challenges there. And so I didn't really have a model of what does healthy communication look like. And I continued working to try and find that stuff. But the more that I've learned, the more that I've understood, is that a lot of those things that were happening were just so really unhealthy relationship behaviors on both parts. And
Hmm.
so it's learning about that, understanding what does a healthy relationship look like, what are the things, and then growing and healing yourself from the inside. So I needed the work on healing the anger, the resentment, the bitterness, the rejection that I felt, all those things,
Hmm.
so that I could, even though I still feel them, I could still show up as a
Hmm.
partner from a place that I can still, as you had mentioned, accept them as they are.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's where, we caused a lot of internal struggle for me.
Right.
I don't know if that answered directly your question, but I felt I should bring it up.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you so much for sharing that. And so, have you been able to get the support, even if it's been years later, but have you been able to get that support to feel heard and to have a place to kind of put those thoughts and feelings and work through anger and resentment and all of those things? Have you been able to
Yeah,
do
absolutely. Yeah, that process started years ago,
good?
kind of in the midst of all that stuff, right?
Okay.
And so you walk the walk. You
Yeah.
start taking one step at a time, and so that's really what it's been. It's an ongoing. It'll be continually learning and growing and adjusting and adapting.
Yeah,
But it all starts with that awareness of what it is first, and then processing through whatever those feelings are.
absolutely. And so, did you know anyone like in your family or circle of people that had been to therapy or couples therapy? Like, what was that like, kind of saying, okay, we need to do something here. Let's go do it. But had you had that modeled for you by other people?
Yeah, I'd actually been to counseling as like early teenager as a
Okay.
result of my childhood traumatic experience. So it's something I'd experienced in my teen years, and of course something that I saw modeled from my home life. My parents,
Yeah.
my mom in particular, was always working on herself, always learning, growing. Did counseling for years and years and years as well,
Right.
and so that was just something that and I've always been one that really likes feedback.
Right.
You want me to grow? Want me to learn? Give me the feedback.
Yeah.
What am I doing? How am I doing? And what do I need to do to get better? So I know that's counter to a lot of men.
Hmm.
Men, a lot of men are like, hell no,
Right.
I'm not gonna talk to anybody. I don't need help. Like I'm whatever. So that was something that I was very open to. Willing to meet with somebody and talk with somebody, and tried multiple people at different times and semi connect with somebody. Like, oh, okay, all right, moving
Nope.
on. And
Yep.
so that was something that just came pretty natural for me,
Nice.
in combination with my desire
Mhm.
to achieve success, we'll say, from a family perspective and from a husband and father perspective.
Right, right. Trying to achieve that like healthy relationship goals and all that that encompasses healthy communication and healthy boundaries and all those
Absolutely.
lovely things.
Yeah.
And so are you, I mean, I know you're on a podcast, which is public information, but in terms of like even at that time, like were you open with friends or family members like I'm going to therapy or we're going to counseling?
Uh, was I wasn't hiding it from them.
Right, right.
But it wasn't like I come, hey guys, guess what? At
Guess
therapy
what?
today.
Right.
No, I wasn't doing that either.
Okay. Okay. That's fair. And so, again, in hindsight, perfect world, if you were to look back in that time that was really, the height of difficulty and kind of being able to even recognize like what's going on here, right? What do you think could be helpful and could be helpful for other people going forward?
Yeah. Well, there are a couple things that happened that I think were really valuable. The couple friends that I had spoken to, they said, look, if I know there's sometimes things that are going on. If you ever want to talk to somebody, just reach out.
Mm,
And that's always helpful to know that you've got somebody who's there.
yeah.
I don't know that it was necessarily the right friends though at that time who were expressing that. And I
Right.
don't know that I was connected to the right friends at the time who would be a valuable support in the process. So I think you always have to be important to, you always start with, I think, people who know you and you trust and you
Hmm.
feel safe with, emotionally, psychologically safe with, I'd say.
Yeah.
Because I think because they know you, and
Hmm.
because if they're trusted, they generally tend to have been given advice.
Yeah.
That's a great starting point.
Hmm.
And then from there, they may also recommend, hey, have you ever thought about this? Have you ever thought about that? Like I had friends who, one friend sent me a book in the mail, and I was like, that's great. And it was a fantastic resource.
Nice.
And then another friend said, hey, why don't you go talk to somebody? Or another family member said, well, why don't you guys go talk to somebody? So I think
Mhm.
starting there is always helpful, because there's relationship already, and there's that capital T trust, which I think is critical.
Super.
From there, they can either connect you or refer you. That's why referrals are so important for business, right?
Yeah.
Because there's that know, like, and trust factor.
Yeah.
So I think that's what's helpful is people
Mhm.
you trust. And then from there, it's what resources are easily accessible on the internet. Literally everything's at your fingertips. You can
Yeah.
find and consume things within a span of 5 to 10 minutes that is almost exactly what it is you're searching for. And then that can be the next search. Okay, well, what's next? We found some online courses around parenting
Hmm.
that we ended up enrolling in and
Nice.
found because they were valuable,
Yep.
some more valuable than others, but we could find them when we made those decisions. There were other additional, like a retreat or an event that we went to, or just some of those things are, again, all accessible. So you just have to, I think, start the process. And I always say it starts with the people who know you best and that you have the greatest amount of trust with, and then build out from there.
Absolutely. And what I'm curious from your perspective about the internet, which
Mhm.
obviously it's a fantastic thing and can be so helpful. Do you ever notice maybe in like whether it was in yourself or maybe dads that you come in contact now where the internet becomes problematic?
Absolutely.
Okay, because the way I'll just give you like kind of a explanation. What I mean is like what I see is, especially if anxiety is present, is the like obsession with, well, those people on the internet are doing it that way, I have to do it that way, or they recommended this, we have to do it to the T, right? Not when we're in a place that's maybe not our healthiest, we're not necessarily trusting ourselves, our parenting abilities. And so we're kind of like latching on to these other resources and supports as like, well, I don't know what I'm doing, so I have to follow this thing, right? And that resource on the internet doesn't know your kid, doesn't know your family dynamics, doesn't know you. And that creates like added anxiety, whether it's around developmental milestones or feeding or sleeping. I see it becoming really distressing for people. And I'm just curious from like your perspective, if you notice that or experience that, what are your thoughts?
I think you're absolutely right. It's a two-edged sword.
Mm-hmm.
It can be a great advantage, but
Mm-hmm.
it can be equally destructive if, not known and understood for what it is, and um, evaluated in the context of you as an individual and your goals and your circumstances,
Mm-hmm.
and moving forward with a very clear focus on what your needs are. And
Mm-hmm.
you, and so I think the other detriment to that is, um, that what I when I work with people, it's this idea of this comparison. And comparison for me is always, I call it the comparison trap,
Mm-hmm.
because what you're doing is, I'm here, they are here. Look, naturally, what you're focusing on is that gap.
Yeah.
And the gap is always going to be you're less than or not as good as, and I need to be up here. And so you're trapping yourself in a negative mindset, a negative perspective, and you're automatically looking at what you don't have as opposed to seeing where your strengths lie, what value you do have, and then what are the one or two things you can do next. Ideally just one. Like, what's the one next step you need to take to be able to move from where you are to where you might want to be, not
Right.
where so and so on the internet says you're supposed to be or doing what you're supposed to do. So
Right.
it does require um, a little bit more thoughtfulness than just simply blindly take what so and so says,
Mm-hmm.
um, based on your situation.
Right.
So it's a great point you make.
Yeah, thank you. And speaking to that, so you mentioned kind of this, you know, trying to even understand like what is a healthy relationship? What are boundaries? Like what's healthy communication, right?
Hmm.
And unfortunately, we don't, well, I did not learn that in school.
Hmm.
And if we are in a family situation where our parents are not modeling those skills for us, like whether, there's trauma or abuse or they're lacking those skills, because
Yes.
we're all human, right, as
Hmm.
parents, um, where do we learn it? And so now I kind of say, well, we learn it if we go to therapy when we're adults, right? And so I'm curious what you think, and I don't know if this ties into, the supports and the content that Dad Central offers, but where do you see like how we can help adults learn these skills, like these crucial skills that we're not learning, right?
Hmm.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great point. There are quite a few great resources out there that
Yeah.
I think I trust and
Mhm.
have come to appreciate, that have helped me in my journey.
Yeah.
And I think So I'm happy to talk about some of those. Part
Sure.
of that is, I've been doing writing for both my business Connected Dads and for Dad Central. Some of the blogs really speak to some of this like individual work,
Mhm.
heart work, as Ed, my co-host, likes to say,
Yeah.
but with very practical elements of, well, how do you apply this like in my context as a dad or in this parenting paradigm? And so, how you learn it is kind of like when you go back to when you go to school, like
Right.
you start with the ABCs and
Right.
one, two, threes. Like,
Yep.
what are the basics? Right. And so there are many ways you can find what is healthy communication,
Mhm.
what are healthy boundaries, what, learning how do you show model respect, or how do you show respect? How do you show empathy? How do you show compassion? How do you develop your listening skills? How do you learn more and show understanding to another person? If
Mhm.
you're in discomfort or pain because you're sensing people aren't experiencing that from you, then you got to go find the resources. And so for me, a big part of that work has been, I'm a big fan of Dr. Laura Markham and her Aha Parenting blog. I think
Yeah.
she's got such a simple approach: is manage yourself,
Mhm.
connect with your child, and an emotion coach, right? And that's the biggest challenge I find, and I found as we're going through our difficult time, is the lack of emotional awareness or emotional intelligence
Yep.
is a huge challenge. And so the more that you can know and understand the emotion that you're actually feeling, put a name to it, and then be able to process through it in a healthy way, you come out on the other side much better than if you just kind of bury it, stuff it, medicate it, drug it, whatever you want to do with it,
Mhm.
because you don't process it. So I think Dr. Laura Markham is great. Dr. Stuart Shanker has stuff on self-regulation, which we're
Mhm.
actually, a little shameless plug, we're going to have a podcast with Dr. Shanker in the
Nice.
next 2 weeks. So he'll be talking very specifically to dads about the process of self-regulation and how to do it and why it's so important to help you manage stress, and then how
Perfect.
that then translates into the well-being of your child,
Yep.
and keeping yourself calm. So, Dr. Shanker. So those are the types of things that I think offer a lot of value to get started
Mhm.
in learning about healthy relationships. The other thing is, look at people who have healthy relationships or strong relationships or healthy interactions,
Mhm.
and then talk to them if you know them, and ask them,
Mhm.
like, what are you doing? What are you doing well? Like, or how's it working for you? Like have real, honest, vulnerable conversations. Not, you don't necessarily divulge yours, but ask them, hey, like, what's helped you build such a strong relationship with your child, or what's helped you build such a strong partnership with your partner? Because I see you guys and you seem so, well, so much like a team. How
Yeah.
did you get there? Like, even that is a great starting point. And
Yeah.
then these other resources too.
Right.
I've kind of been all over the place, but sorry, that's my
No, no,
my
that's
thoughts.
great. No, thank you so much. And I agree. And I like to, my therapist part likes to add a caveat of, um, asking those people about their relationships and stuff without comparing, right? Like, oh,
Yes.
like you said, right? Because that comparison piece is, oh man, it's such a slippery slope, right? Of like, okay, what are they doing well? Like having that honest, vulnerable conversation, right? Without like, oh, but we're not them, you know, in like a
Mhm.
negative way. It's like, wow, like you said, those are some kind of ideals or um, you know, things that I'd love to bring into our relationship, in a healthy way and see how we can make it ours and improve our relationship and seek support from them versus like, oh, you guys are better than us,
Mhm. Yeah.
Type of
I
thing.
will actually throw out there one other resource. It's
Yeah.
Dr. Henry Cloud, his book Boundaries. I
Okay.
think it was like written in the late 80s, but there's been like multiple versions, and even like in specific contexts. To me, an amazing, powerful, but simple tool
Mm.
that helps in so many ways build healthy relationships.
Yes. And is so helpful in our parenting too, right?
Yes.
Like kids feel safe with boundaries. We feel safe with boundaries. Like we know, okay, this is kind of the context within which I can operate and you can operate, and anything in this square is safe, and this boundary is safe. And those are good things. Those are healthy things. Those are important and helpful things to have and to know, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And so I think just this is why I do the podcast is just like the talking about it, right? Like opening up these discussions. Hopefully someone can hear this and just, talk to their partner like, hey, I heard this today, or, talking to friends or family members and just opening up, starting somewhere with someone safe, like you said, someone close that you trust, to open up the discussion with, and then depending on your situation, if therapy, counseling is something that would be helpful, then branching out to there. But yeah, looking up those resources, and I'll put in the show notes all those resources you mentioned. And so that brings me to asking you about Dad Central. Tell us about if you want to tell us about Connected Dads and Dad Central and what kind of they're all about.
Okay. Well, Dad Central has been around about 22 years, and their main focus is helping fathers be more positively involved in the lives of their children.
Mhm.
We like to say we're the most trusted name in fatherhood because we started with research. We partnered with researchers, we built it in communities, we collected feedback, and we built our resources off of that research, and we've built our training and development off of the research and also feedback from communities and different partners. And so, we have simple, practical guides for dads to help them be as positive involved in the lives of their kids as they can across all different contexts, right? Whatever your life situation is, whatever's going on, we have a resource that can help support you. And so we do that primarily through booklets, through tip sheets, through fact marks. We have a library of webinars we did through the pandemic because everything was virtual. And now we've moved into a podcast. And so we have a weekly podcast. Our subtitle is Tools to Raise Confident and Successful Kids. Really, we just help have great conversations that are real, authentic, vulnerable, but provide practical tools. And we say coach dads to be
Mhm.
the best that they can be, so they can show up the best for their family and help their kids grow to be successful. So that's Dad Central. Connected Dads is more my personal coaching and training organization where I work directly with dads. And so I run small groups that are called accelerator groups. I also do individual coaching. And then, of course, I do community, either events or workshops or things like that, just to promote positive fatherhood, helping men be the best that they can be. My tagline for Connected Dads is helping you show up at your best for the people who matter most. And so usually your partner and your children are the ones who matter most, because many times men or dads can get caught up in, chasing after things that really their impact is not going to be as significant if they did the same intentionality at home. So that's kind of my focus with Connected Dads.
Amazing. So I will put all that in the show notes, and I've sent dads your way to the website to check out the supports because I think they're great. I love when you say practical. That's kind of the way I work too, is like what is realistic? What can you realistically take from this conversation, or, for example, in my professional work from this session, especially when little kids are present, right? Like you want practical, you want like easy to implement or doable things when you do have little ones running around or trying to take care of them and trying to manage relationship and work and finances and all the things. So that practical piece, I think, is so key for people to take away. And
Yes, thank
so,
you.
yeah, thank you. And so, is there anything kind of any advice that you like to share, or anything, from your story that you find we didn't touch on, that you wanted to kind of leave with us?
Well, we got an email recently from somebody who was like, I got 4 kids. My partner wants me to do this, 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 and this. And I'm like, I'm feeling stressed out. Simple question: what can I do?
Mhm.
So I think the simple thing is everyone's circumstance is different, but your challenges are your challenges. And if you need help and support, start with, taking care of yourself. And
Mhm.
that might mean having a conversation with a trusted friend. Then find a resource that's
Mhm.
trusted, that is valid, and that has something practical. One next step you can take, and then
Mhm.
take it.
Yeah.
And then once you have those conversations about caring for yourself or taking care of your well-being with somebody like and trust, and they give you something to do,
Mm-hmm.
Go and do it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then check back in with them after you're doing it and see how things go and build from there. But starts, I think, with taking care of yourself and then finding some form of a resource because they're out there. Make
Yeah.
sure they're trusted
Yeah.
and do what they encourage you to do.
Yeah. And align with your values,
Yeah.
right? Like if they align with your parenting values, your personal values, then, you'll probably get that feeling, okay, this feels okay. This feels like something I can do. And I love that you said do one thing,
Just one.
right? Yeah, just start somewhere with one thing. And definitely that self-care piece is usually the best kind of first step, right? Thank you so much, Drew, for talking to me, for sharing about your story and the way you support dads in the community. I really, really appreciate it. And where can people find you or reach out to you?
So the easiest is Dad Central. So dadcentral.ca.
Yeah,
In terms of connected dads, it's connecteddads.ca. And then my email is drew, DREW, at connecteddads.ca. Those are the best and easiest ways to get a hold of me or find out more about what Dad Central or Connected Dads does.
perfect. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thanks so much for having me and allowing me to share a little bit of my story on your show.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Please share this podcast with any of your friends or family members who may benefit from it. If you feel you are experiencing any of the symptoms or issues that we discussed today, please reach out to any one of your supports or go to perinatalwellbeing.ca for more information, blog posts, podcast episodes, and ways to connect with us. Check out our new episode every other Monday.